two of them being properties of the mediums themselves. One, that the space is continuous, and we'll talk about the design implications of that. Implicit intent, in that the medium can know what your intent is based on just sort of a side effect of the medium itself. And then different ways of thinking about interactions based solely on the coordinate systems that are present within the medium. So a little bit about me. So I started in commercial post-production as a technical director, moved towards large-scale installations for things like music venues, museums, wherein you could like walk in and be presented with information, but that the interaction that you have is pretty limited. Moved towards operating system design and applications on top of that. That was for Apple. And then moved towards mobile devices like the iPhone, the iPad. Starting to get more towards devices that you carry with you and ones which have more sensors. Moving towards the watch itself, being augmented with the IMU or the motion sensors. And starting to see and move towards technology that you carry with you and that becomes more a part of you. This is sort of my general goal of trying to ease the transition as we move to this new type of thing, which is some kind of human machine. We don't know yet. And then starting to explore virtual reality and augmented reality. And I'll tell you a little bit about why, and it has to do with some of those things that I was talking about. But really, for me, it's because not only is it undiscovered, and that's sort of a fun thing, but also because the potential experience that we can have in it is pretty amazing. Hopefully I can convey a little bit of that. Properties of the medium itself. So I talked a little bit about continuous space. So what does that mean? So you put this HMD on, or whatever you want to call it. There's no really good words yet. And you look around, and it is constantly updating what you're seeing to correlate with the space that you're moving in. And why is that interesting? Well, one of the side effects of the sort of presence that you get from being inside of software, and this is really, you could say, the first time that we've been inside of software, because when you put the thing on, the glass goes away, and you're no longer looking at software, you're in the software. And given enough cues, you can feel that presence just like you do today here in this world. From a design perspective, it's really interesting because there are no frames. So if you look at that chart, anyway, if you look at the chart that I showed, where essentially like, okay, moving from television to desktop or whatever, all of these things have edges. You guys still hear me? Hello? Yeah? Okay. So all of those things have frames or borders, and there's implications to frames and borders. Some of them good, particularly like in photography, is really interesting because of the frame and the border. Software likewise, but has implications. So for instance, if you look at or think about any of the operating systems that you've interacted with, they all have like a main point of view or a main central focus. So essentially where your phobia tends to be, and the human phobia is pretty narrow, it's like this big, but we stitch together this world and our eyes are constantly saccading. But one of the results of these framed mediums is that we tend to push things towards the edges. So if you think about like OS 10, you have the menu bar at the top, it's as small as it can possibly be. If you look at Windows, we have the taskbar on the bottom. If you look at iOS or Android, we're pushing everything towards the edges. And that allows you to focus on the main content area, but still know how to get to other things. And oftentimes that means of interaction or those affordances are always present, and so always visible within your periphery. Because the space of augmented and virtual reality is continuous, you have no edges in which to hide things, which is actually a good thing, because what you can do is you can put things in the periphery. They still reinforce because they're there. You can sort of still see them if you want to. And then sort of the fallout of this, or one of the implications of this, is that you don't really need icons anymore. So one of the ways that you sort of get things out of the way in a framed medium is that you push them towards the edges, so spatially, but also you can abstract them, so you can turn ideas or different elements or different UIs into icons that represent that functionality. And that's great, and icon designers are amazing and produce beautiful work that represents an idea often. But oftentimes that's a learned thing and has cultural implications, and when you have a continuous space, you don't actually have to deal with this. You can just put things in different places, say out of that main view, and as a result, they stay in sight and in mind. So this is one of the issues that we have in operating system design, is that when you push things to the edges, oftentimes you'll actually end up pushing them out of the edge. So if you look at something like Expose or Mission Control on OS 10, it's sort of out of sight, out of mind, and for most of the customers, doesn't exist or accidentally exists. So you can avoid some of those things in AR and VR. The other thing that I find really interesting about the medium is implicit intent. And so as a side effect of the fact that it's generating a world for your eyes based on the motion of your head, it knows where I'm looking. So what that means is I can have a box or whatever, and I can look at the box, and the box knows or can know, given behaviors, that I'm looking at the box. And so, okay, why do I care? Why does the box care? So this is the first time we've ever really had this kind of intent be implicit. So before we've had explicit intent. So for instance, on the desktop you can move your mouse around and hover, as antiquated as that sounds, you can hover over something, essentially poke at it and say, what are you, or what can you do for me? In this case, I can just look at the thing and it can respond accordingly. So for instance, you can imagine UIs wherein, like, say there's a grid and the thing that you're looking at gets bigger and exposes itself in a way that, say, is not only contextually relevant, but relevant to in the sense that I'm actually expressing intent. And I think maybe the real world analog of this is eye contact. So you guys know when I'm looking at you, and that can be amazing. We get that between people, we get that between certain animals, particularly dogs, and magic can happen. You know, people fall in love and all kinds of crazy things happen. So the medium itself has the potential to do amazing things, and we can talk a little bit about that later if we still have time. And okay, so two ways that you can think about this are in relation to the coordinate systems in which they inhabit. So you have this sort of self or body-locked coordinate system, and then you have the coordinate system of the world. So most people tend to think about, or don't even know about how to think about coordinate systems or what they mean or why they're important. But in this case, it's an interesting way to think about it. So in terms of the self, you can think about a coordinate system as how things relate to you. So in the case of, say, the vehicle's a really early example of one of the ways that we can operate in an augmented reality. So you get in a car, that's the vehicle most people are used to, or the cockpit of a plane or something like that. You have a bunch of controls that essentially emanate from you. They're all within arm's reach, and this is actually a result of a lot of research, because particularly in avionics, early cockpits were not very good, meaning that there was a lot of user error that resulted from poorly placed objects or poorly placed affordances or sized affordances. But essentially this user interface emanates from you, and then you have a view of the world that's not, say, encumbered by that interface. One of the ways that you can imagine that evolving, particularly in a malleable medium such as VR AR, where you can actually try and play with these things, and I don't know how many of you guys are engineers or designers, but I encourage you to really just try it, because it's not that hard. You can boot up Medium, Unity, or Unreal, and go through some tutorials and figure out how to start playing with this stuff, and then try things out. So for instance, you can imagine these affordances of a cockpit, say your car or whatever, all of the stuff between them disappearing, and the window itself going away, and now you're, say, within an environment, and you have a bunch of UI emanating from you. I tend to think about that as like a chest-locked UI, so it's all around you, and when I move my body, it sort of moves with me, but I can still move my head and not look at things or look at things. And where does that essentially dissolve to is, I think in the real world, an analog of that would be like pockets. So I have pockets, pockets are places that are stable in the coordinate system of my body. I can put things in them, I remember what's in them, I can abstract them in the sense that if I usually put my phone in my back right pocket, if it's not there, I know. So these are interesting kind of ways of thinking about it. Another example is tools. So for instance, like your hand is part of your body, and that can also become an interface. So it can become a paintbrush, or it can hold a paintbrush. It can become, particularly like what you're seeing in VR today, it can become like a gun or a sword, or you can hold a gun or a sword. Then you can also have UI that emanates from your body, like in the sense of like a watch as an analog today, but that can also be a menuing system or whatever. You can imagine, like there's some examples, for instance, happening with Orion coming out of Leap, where you can open your hand and menus sort of emanate from your fingers and you can pick them. Or this continuum can actually move into the real world if you look at something like HoloLens, where you can spawn UI in your hand. So you open your hand and UI appears in the world, and then you can interact with it. And then in the case of the world coordinate system, this is one that we're very used to. There's just objects in the world, you can walk around and interact with them, but also they can present an interface in the way that like you can walk up to your microwave and push a bunch of buttons. But again, if you sort of bring that intent, or you start adding behaviors to the objects, say in this case the microwave can know that I'm looking at it, and what does that mean? For instance, the UI cannot be there, and then be there if I'm looking at it, or it could be aware of some of the things that I'm aware of. And this starts to happen when you start to think about devices as not being something like the equivalent of the smart fridge, where it's like the fridge has some kind of computing substrate, so for instance has a processor and is part of the Internet of Things and connected to the Internet, but is more like, simply says in maybe at most or in the least, depending upon how you want to look at it, I'm a refrigerator. So that could literally be nothing. And I'm wearing a device such that I can recognize that it's a refrigerator, and then as a result, behaviors are assigned to it and computed in the cloud, but all of that is essentially emanating from me, as opposed to the refrigerator itself doing the computation. So why is that interesting or important? It's interesting in the sense that I'm the one mediating the information that the refrigerator knows about. And as a result, so for instance, say I'm going to, I go back and forth between this refrigerator and microwave, I'm going to microwave, say, a potato. If I'm looking at the potato, I know that I'm looking at the potato. I can put it in the microwave, it can just cook it. I don't have to then go through some kind of state machine on how to microwave a potato. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Those are the things I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you. You can also ask me concrete questions.
From what I can see, the way the augmented reality, the interaction kind of limited. Sometimes I don't even know what the interaction mechanism are available. So unless you look at the predefined object where you can augment it, and then you know how to interact. But most of the time you don't really know how to interact. And then especially because you are seeing real world, probably you can't really kind of do the direct manipulation or kind of call the information on demand. Right? So how that kind of the interaction works. Primarily, not very clear interaction model there.
Okay, well, so part of the interesting thing is because you have intent, the thing you want to interact with can tell you how to interact with it. And so while you don't have the feedback that you would typically get through direct manipulation, you can still employ a lot of the same interaction models. So for instance, I can walk up to an object, and because I'm interested in it, one, from a design standpoint, I can know that I've never interacted with it before, so that object can then present an onboarding experience. And that onboarding experience could be as simple as, oh, here's a bunch of handles that emanate from it that are tagged in a way that I can read and understand. And then you can push and pull those things. And even through simple haptic feedback, say like if you're using the Vive and you have the wands and they present a vibration, it's often enough to simulate the equivalent of something like force feedback that you would experience in the real world. So if one of these handles essentially vibrated when I pulled the trigger and started to push on it, I would know that I'm actually pushing on it. I'm getting that feedback from my vision, I'm getting sort of a false feedback from the haptic feedback from the wand, and then it's believable enough. I'm never in it, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So what I would encourage you to do is like, if you haven't tried Vive, put on the Vive and try out a couple of the applications that are available. Because once you start looking at like room scale VR with haptic feedback, it starts to intimate at what's possible in AR. Anybody else?
I think the implicit intent, how to get into this implicit intent is very interesting area. Do you have any methodology to study this area?
Yeah, sure. So most of the development that I do today is in Unity, just because I like C# and Unity is pretty easy and the community is really strong. So the way that you would explore implicit intent in Unity is you have ray casting, which essentially shoots an infinite ray from your head. So if you attach a ray to the HMD, you can then do the detection on the ray itself. So ray casting will tell you the objects that it intersects, and you can say, do something from there. You can get the first object that it hits, or you can do essentially like a ray march, and you can say, build up a stack of objects that it hits in order, and then when something gets hit, an event can be fired. That event can be intercepted by that object, and then that object can respond accordingly. So ray enter, ray stay, ray exit. Does that make sense?
Like more curriculum.
Sure. Yeah. Is that too specific? Non-specific?
I think that's probably the area, but it could be also a lot broader. So let's say if you have, let's say,
For example, when we use our magic tablet, when you draw things, and depending on how you draw, the intention can be different. It could be, so how do you really read the intention of the user? And sometimes they don't even know what they are really intending. So how to read these? And I think that opens up a huge research.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, especially when you start to look in domain-specific ways. I mean, I tend to like to give the user choice, particularly because, like, I think we get it wrong a lot in software design when we try to read people's minds. But in the particular domain that you're describing, so drawing, like, how am I drawing? Am I drawing in a way that's, that can present in multiple different ways. It could be like I'm angry, it could be an emotional state, or it could be like fluid and more like a mechanism of the drawing medium itself. But that's pretty, those are fairly abstract. It could be transferred to other mediums. So there may be a way to understand those generally. But I think in terms of being non-specific to domains, I think, at least from my perspective, the best option is to give the user choice. So for instance, like, they may not know what their intent is, but you can try to intuit some of